keynote speakers this morning, Bishop K. Ward. Bishop Ward, in 1998, was consecrated as the first female bishop in the Moravian Unity. She is retired from Moravian Theological Seminary, where she served 16 years in positions as administrator, fund developer, and professor. She's working on her 6th book, so a little plug there. No? Okay. Oh, five. Okay. Okay, I won't push it. Which will be her 4th book of essays. Yes. So definitely look out for that coming. There's more in your program about Bishop Ward. Reverend Christie Melby-Gibbons is executive director of the Tricklebee Cafe. If you're not familiar with that yet, you will be. But she is Milwaukee's first pay what you can community cafe. And it's an emerging ministry of the Moravian Church. So definitely something you may want to look up and maybe inspire you to do in your own community. Her undergraduate work was in Russian language and area studies, as well as an approved self-designed, I want to get all of this right, major in nature theology, considering questions at the intersection of theological and environmental studies, including recovering evaluation of nature and a sense of responsible stewardship through spiritual reflection. We should all sit down and have a conversation with Christie Melby-Gibbons. So without further ado, ladies, please make your way up.
Okay, we're on.
We're on.
Did you notice earlier, we did not tell them to do this, they flipped our names earlier, did you catch that? It's funny because there's a joke that I'm a younger version of you and you're an older version of me, and we have like the same outfit on up there on the screen. That's funny.
Now we know.
Yeah, we're kind of the same person.
Kind of the same person.
A little bit.
Yeah. I am an ordained Moravian woman.
I also am an ordained Moravian woman. That's fine. Yeah, well, I like to wear my hair short.
Me too. What little I have. I don't have a functioning uterus.
Shop at thrift stores.
Never met a thrift shop I didn't like. I'm a mother by adoption.
So am I.
Huh.
Mm-hmm.
We're just alike.
Yeah. I write devotionals for Lutherans.
I just finished a 3-month Bible study on Esther for the Lutherans.
No way.
No way. The bigger the crowd I'm speaking to, the more comfortable I am.
Totally. Yeah. I can be kind of loud, especially when I'm laughing.
Oh. Yeah, well, people have said that about me. Yeah, me too. I lived in the woods for a long time.
So did I. It's unreal.
We are the same people.
I had a stifling upbringing, which taught me that women are lesser than men.
So did I. So did I.
That's the end of our comedic section of the presentation. We worked hard on that. So the conference is called Unleash Your Power. So we thought we'd be creative and give our section a title. We call it Power to Unleash. So that starts by us saying that despite our upbringing, which sort of stifled power, maybe generationally and theologically for me, We did have people in our lives that inspired us and were powerful examples, especially women who were powerful. And I'm going to share briefly 2 people, and then Kay will do the same. So for me, one of the most powerful women in my life who taught me that femaleness does not mean powerlessness was my maternal grandmother, Margaret Ellen Sipe. We called her Grandma Ducky. She lived on a lake with lots of ducks, so Grandma Ducky. She was a professional jazz singer, and she hooked wool rugs. And she loved to tell people, I'm a hooker. All the time, yeah. So she was a card. She did prison ministry. I always connected just very easily with her. She was comfortable in her own body. She taught me that it's okay to wake up at 2 in the morning. If you're craving caramel popcorn, you make that caramel popcorn and you eat it at 2 in the morning. She taught me that you can love your wrinkled, unshaven body enough to live in a bathing suit all summer and swim whenever you want, no matter who comes over. She taught me a love of garage sailing. We called it thrifting. We'd go sailing on the weekends. And a love of Ella Fitzgerald, that voice. And her voice sounded uncannily like hers. So she lost her mental faculties over the last 12 years through Alzheimer's. Just slowly forgot everything, everybody. But she always remembered she could do things without man's help. She never asked a man for help. She prided herself, I can lift that myself. No, thank you, sir. She'd always do that. But she also remembered, I got a granddaughter who's a pastor in California. She'd tell everybody, had no memory of having children, no memory of ever being married, but she had a granddaughter who's a pastor in California. And I think she remembered it because I was an anomaly in my family, which was very conservative, fundamentalist. So, women pastor, what is that? So that stuck in her brain. And I would tell her, you know, Graham, some people don't think it's okay that I'm a pastor. And she'd say, oh, how prehistoric. So she would say. I miss her terribly. She passed away in February, and I've long been wearing her turquoise rings that were antiques when she was young on my fingers. I just remember so much about her, and she had a free spirit, and she had 2 adjectives she used. I've never heard her use another adjective. When she was describing someone's behavior or their clothing, she'd say, oh, that's so tacky. Or, how classy. So she was a classy woman. She totally was. The second woman who was a very powerful person in my life, I met in my first year of college. So I was in a theology class, and the professor gave us an assignment to go have a foreign worship experience. So, all right, I'm a kid raised in the woods in the capital T Truth Bible Church that I was raised in. So I open up a phone book, and I'm flipping through. Do people still use phone books? So I'm looking through, I find all the churches, and I find these Moravians. I'm like, what kind of cult is that? So, talk about foreign. I'm in Northfield, Minnesota, so I go to the Main Street Moravian Church. And I'm thinking, you know, my legalistic upbringing is telling me these people are lost. It's going to be witchcraft. I don't know what's going to happen. But I walked in the room and received the warmest welcome I've ever felt. They remembered my name the second time I came back. It was instant family. I'm still connected with the people from that place. And every hymn that we sang, every liturgy we spoke, I felt like I was home suddenly theologically for the first time in my life. I said, I can get on board with that. That's what I believe. It was this pivotal moment in my faith formation. And the person who was up there leading the worship gathering was Amy Godis-Lumen. Have you met her? I think she was at one of the conferences a few years back. So she was preaching some very relatable story about how she was biking and got off her bike to help this little poor dying bird have a peaceful last few minutes. And I was like, oh, this lady is so cool. She was the first female pastor I had ever seen in my life. She was punchy, she was educated, she rolled her eyes when she thought something was idiotic. And I just thought, this is my place. So 5 years she was my deacon supervisor, and she continues to be a mentor and a good friend and an inspiration.
Amazing women. Starting when I was very young, I ended up living with grandparents on a farm and met an old eccentric woman whose name was Elizabeth McCoy. And I wasn't in school yet, but she was the kind of eccentric woman that little girls love. She wore house dresses with a rope around the middle, and she always had some baby animal under the kitchen table that I would go. And her best story was that there was someone buried in her basement. And so she would take me down, and I would walk on where this person who had fallen off when the house was being built, fallen off the roof, and I would try to figure out, well, is this his head? Is this a dirt basement? She told me that I was a very smart little girl, and that I would go to college someday, and maybe even probably get a doctorate. Now, when you're 5, I had no idea what college was, and then when I entered grade school in a little country church, I was the only kid in first grade. The college seemed very far away. It was only much later that I learned that she was, in fact, a college professor at the University of Wisconsin. I have a picture of her hanging next to my desk, of sitting in a beautiful big window in her big old house. I'm holding a lost kitten, and she is smiling, and I think she is still smiling at me. Secondly, when I was 9, a pastor, a jovial, smart pastor, knocked on my mother's door. My family was not churched, and asked if I could go to Sunday school. And my mother thought that would be okay as long as I could walk there, and it was just a couple blocks. And Lakeview Moravian Church in Madison, Wisconsin was being started in a house. And those people took me in. They took me by the hand, and they never let go. I still get notes from my Sunday school teacher. When you're in a startup, in a house, everybody does everything. So if it's time to make a committee, they put whatever kid they can find. And then when I got to be in the 7th grade, they said, well, you're certainly old enough to teach Sunday school. And I loved it all. I loved it all. And I was there every time the door of the church was open. But it was in that church that I met Marvel Redmond Heath. Some of you will know her. She moved to Madison to be the executive director of the YWCA, and she came to help us from Minnesota as a helper. Now, I did a little work on this and research. The Moravian Church didn't ordain women, but they had a lot of names. Parish assistant and pastoral assistant and Christian educator and acolyte. I don't know what they called Marvel, but she was Marvel. They called her Marvel. Marvelous Marvel. She did everything in the church. She led worship when Milo was doing something else, having 2 churches. Long before ordination, she was a pastor to me. She worked tirelessly with Milo to build that little church, especially working with those of us who were younger. As a young girl, the important thing for me is that I could see myself in her. I could see myself doing that work. If you see it, you can be it.
Speaking of being, you all have a short piece of paper if you want to pull that out. This is something, I'll move over to the podium now.
Yeah.
But this is something I keep on my refrigerator. That's a place for very important things. This is rules to achieve burnout. There's 14 of them. I'll read them out. Do everything perfectly. Work a minimum of 10 hours per day. Take your work home with you. Work on all weekends and as many holidays as possible. Eat lots of junk food. Always remain idealistic and as inflexible as possible. Do your best to please everyone all the time. Never delegate. Remember, nobody does it better than you. Never waste time relaxing, exercising, or praying. Never take time off. It only makes you feel guilty. Remember that everyone else's needs come first. Be sure to get emotionally involved in everything you do. Maintain control of as many things in your life as possible. Never say no, and make everyone else's problems your own. Anybody achieved all of these in their life? Look on there and just find like maybe your top 2 or 3 or 4. Just kind of highlight those in your mind. I really struggle with number 7. That is hard for me. And sometimes it's true, and that's what's hard. You know what I mean? Like, I can do this better than you, so I'm just going to do it. But I need to learn to kind of let go and whatever. But this is a good list if you want to put it on your fridge, kind of come back to it. I think women especially struggle with these 14 things. So, yeah, if you want to highlight a couple and try to work on those in the coming year or for the rest of your life, that would be great. 'Cause we want to be powerful, but we do not want to burn out, for sure. I would like to share my origin story with you. It's not terribly long, but just to kind of give you a taste of, what I was told and what I became. I was born powerful, as we all are. On May 1st, I arrived on May Day, the day that all the little bulbs start to push up through the earth, right? And the May flowers come. So I've always had these strong feelings of justice, inclined to seek justice. I always felt like a leader. I've always been a doer, and I get stuff done, and I do it well. My spirit animal, I've decided, is the hummingbird. They're little, colorful, they'll kind of get in your face, and they can fly 500 miles without resting. And they only need 15-second breaks a couple times a day. That's who I am. So for most of my life, I have found my power in flourishing at whatever I do, which some people who are sort of less than flourishing folks would look in on and call overachieving or sucking up. That was what I was told my whole life. And I did this because I thought I had to. The alternative was to be the submissive, unopinionated, indoorsy female that I thought I had to be. But I never fit into that cage. I confirmed my faith when I was 15 years old in the Covenant Church in Ishpeming, Michigan, and Bible memorization was a huge part of my upbringing. I've got a whole store of scripture in this brain. I was the top of my class in my confirmation class, memorizing scripture, biblical knowledge. I could recite all the core Christian beliefs as they were written in our booklet. I can still sing the Books of the Bible song, the whole song. I won't do it now, but if you want to hear me do it later, I can still do it. So back in 1998 in the Covenant Church, we confirmands got to choose our own Bible verse. It wasn't assigned to us. So one of the boys in the class, a couple years younger than me, who was not too keen on confirmation, he picked the verse, Jesus wept. The shortest verse he could find. So I chose, it's ironic that you shared this one, Philippians 4:13. I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. And for the next 20 years, I did just that. All things. Through Christ who strengthens me, of course. I played tennis, was the number 2 tennis playing champ in all of the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. I was in all of the high school plays and musicals, often in the lead role. I was in the Michigan State Honors Choir. I had 4, sometimes 5 jobs simultaneously while I was in college. Full-time student in college. I was a hair and makeup artist for the theater department. I did sound and light technician stuff for the dance department. I was an assistant archivist in the college archives. I served in the cafeteria, and I was a teacher's aide in the Russian language department, in addition to my 6 classes. I designed my own major, as you shared, which I'll talk about another time. I opened a store after college where I sold all of the things that I create with my hands. I'm a beadist, do jewelry, I make furniture out of scraps of things that I find. I did a tri-ministry internship in Watertown, and I wanted to be ordained. I realized that was my real call. I then got married. We had almost 500 people at our wedding. This crowd for a whole weekend, it was amazing. I went to seminary, full-time graduate study, and then my last semester was asked to also, in my full-time study, be the chaplain at Moravian College. And I said, yeah, sure, I'll do that. I took the call to the Moravian Church of Downey in California. While there, I coordinated their first ever crop hunger walk. We raised $15,000 in the first year. I participated in the annual Los Angeles homeless count to help house and furnish apartments for homeless neighbors. We started a food ministry, a clothing ministry for undocumented Latino neighbors. In California, my life partner and I became parents through foster care and then adoption. I then took a call to Milwaukee, where we've opened the first Pay What You Can restaurant in the whole state, and it's thriving. And we are again foster parents with the hopes of adopting in the state of Wisconsin. And I'm still an artist, making all my stuff, and you know I haven't even listed everything. So one thing that I do prioritize in the midst of all my doing all things is to go to spiritual direction every month. And the funny thing is, we have the same spiritual director.
You should have said that.
That's funny. Okay. So this lady that we see separately, we don't go together, she's a firecracker. I don't know how old she is, maybe early 70s. I don't know. She's young in heart. She's a Wheaton Franciscan sister. She's a truth teller. She can just lay it out. So one day I'm there and I'm talking about my spiritual life, about difficulties I'm having, some pain in my body, how things are going with my walk with God, and I mentioned to her that my confirmation verse is Philippians 4:13. I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. And she stops and looks at me with this really puzzled face as she goes, "No, you can't." And I was like, whoa, I'm 35, and that's the first time I've ever been told that I can't do all things. It was this enlightenment moment for me. So after that session, I sat down in my car and typed into my phone these words: "No life is more precious than my own. I cannot do all things." And since that epiphany, I have been doing better to avoid burnout. I've been feeling more powerful and empowered and free, actually, in kind of the giving up of control and all my list of things to do. I'm working on remembering that my needs come first. Like the oxygen mask thing on the plane. Put it on yourself, honey. So I'm working on that. Most people honor that. My 7-year-old's having some trouble with that. You come first? Okay. I'm also working on the delegating thing, and it's hard for me to watch someone do something not quite how I would do it, but I'm working on that. And I'm learning to let go of controlling everything. I can't anyway, so I try and get frustrated. And I'm finding that there's power in the release of what once confined me. It was actually confined by a verse that I thought was freeing. It restricted me. And I have found the words of Audre Lorde. Anyone familiar with Audre Lorde? Couple hands. Okay, she was big-time writer in the late 70s and 80s, so when I was being born. She had some words. She said, "We women have been raised to fear the yes in ourselves, our deepest cravings. And this is a grave responsibility, not to settle for the convenient, the shoddy, the conventionally expected, nor the merely safe." I love that thought. We have a yes somewhere in there that we can say, and it's probably a yes to us. What do we need to say yes to for ourselves? So I found power in letting go of those conventional expectations. I'm not a conventional pastor. That's not news, so I just let it go. And I'm edging closer to what I was taught to fear as a child. I was told that these certain groups of people are bad and evil and lost, and I'm finding that they're lovely, compassionate, giving, kind, and my world is expanding, my embrace is expanding, and I trust that as I'm becoming more free, that you will be able to do that in your own life as well. And Kay, it's your origin story time.
Mine's considerably longer.
How prehistoric.
So,
We're off script.
yeah, we're off script. Mine's a little different from Christie's, like 40 years different. Almost to the day, 40 years different. I was born at the beginning of World War II. It was a tense, serious time for our country, and I was brought home from the hospital in Madison, Wisconsin, to a Quonset hut. That's a word that doesn't get used very much anymore. Quonset hut out on the runway of the airfield in Madison, Wisconsin. The housing was desperately short at the beginning of the war, and the city had put up temporary housing for those flocking to Madison to help support the war effort. My father was not in the service, but he worked at a battery factory in Madison, supplying the troops, while my mother cared for me. My father left my mother before the war was over, but continued to be a strong influence in my life until his death. Though my mother and my father were very much people of their generation, neither had had education beyond high school, my father not beyond 8th grade. They taught me what they knew. My fun-loving Irish father taught me how to tell a story, to love poetry, and how to work a room. My mother, an English woman more proper, taught me to be industrious, think busy. My mother felt that the greatest worry for her as she was raising me was that I would become addicted to television. Television, if you can old enough to remember, was not a giant success. They were this big and mostly snow. But just to make sure that I would always do something constructive, that was one of my mother's favorite words, I did handwork. I did something while I watched television. I told this story once to a class when I was teaching, and they got me a cup that said, "Jesus is coming, look busy." I've always thought that's a pretty good motto. I mean, we're a lot, Christy and I are a lot alike in that, just keep moving, just keep moving. My mother also taught me how to plan my life and everyone else's. She was a great planner. She lived to almost 97, and she still had little notes on her little memo pad of things she was going to do. Most of all, she taught me to love words and office products. I was raised to be a wife and a mother. That's what women were expected to be in the 40s, especially when the men came home from war. If they had been out riveting airplanes, they were expected to come home, to be back to be wives and mothers. As a little girl, I played house and I loved taking care of my baby dolls. When I lived with grandparents on a farm, I was always taking care of some orphaned piglet or calf or chick. I knew that having a working mother after my father left was an aberration.
My mom was divorced, and she worked outside the home. People mentioned that in hushed tones. No other children that I knew had mothers like mine who went to work in heels and a very severely cut suit because she worked as a stenographer in a law office, not a secretary, ever, a stenographer, which meant that you had one of those long pads with a line down the middle and you could take dictation. She was highly prized by the people in that partnership. You were supposed to have a mother waiting for you at home with warm cookies and milk. Things didn't really change all that much in the 50s. Mamie Eisenhower was in the White House and she wore pearls. And I think when she did the dishes, if she ever did, I don't know. As I grew into my teens, my friends and I, after youth group, Marvel Alt was, of course, in charge of the youth group, and if we could persuade her to take us to McDonald's or to the Red Rooster for snacks, then we would come back to the church and we would play wedding. No, I mean it. We would play wedding. We would take out the hymnal and we would plan our wedding. And we would insert the name of the current boyfriend for the groom of the day. In 9th grade, I met Aden. His name got put in there. The tape in my head was very clear. I was going to get married and I was going to raise a family. Culture told me that I really didn't need to go to college to raise a family, but if I decided to go, I should become a teacher. And here's what people told me. The reason I should become a teacher was that I would be home in the summers with my children. My children. I was always curious. It seemed like the only people that were exempt from this in the 50s were nurses. I never heard anybody complain about nurses not taking care of their children and being home in the summer. That would have been a good choice, except that I do not do much or anything with bodily fluids of any kind, so that was out. I went to Carroll College, a Presbyterian college. I met 4 women the first day of college. We are all still friends. 10 of us have traveled together. We lost a spouse last year about this time. We sat around in our dorms in our pajamas and laughed about coming to college to get our MRS degree. Yeah, that's what we said. That's what we said. I majored in education and religion. I married in my senior year of college to Aden, the love of my life, still most exciting man I ever met. I taught 6th grade while Aden was finishing up his degree and then being a cop. We moved to Pennsylvania for him to attend Moravian Theological Seminary to become a Moravian minister, and that's a tale for another time. I'll go into that. We adopted 2 baby girls and later a baby boy, and my life was turning out just the way I had hoped it would, just the way I had planned it. Aden was called to serve churches in Wisconsin Rapids, where soon after we moved, I went to get a library card. At the time, I was carrying Melissa, who was about 9 months old, and holding tightly to Jennifer. And I filled out the application to get a library card. And she said, well, you can't get your library card under that name. And I said, well, that is my name. And she said, well, you have to put it under your husband's name, Mrs. Aden Ward. And I said, well, why would I do that? And she said, do you have a job? And I said, well. And she said, well, who is going to be responsible for paying a fine if there's a fine? And I said, well, it's interesting because the state of Pennsylvania handed me 2 babies that they thought I could be responsible for. And now you're saying that I can't get a library book out of here? I walked out with a library card that said Mrs. Aden Ward. Sometimes something just changes your life. The library story propelled me into 6 years of consciousness raising. This was the early 70s. I marched, I spoke, I sang, I watched, I took my babies in their strollers, and we marched to pass the ERA, the Equal Rights Amendment. It did not pass. And some sectors are still discussing it. This is my ERA bracelet, the Equal Rights Amendment. I had a young pastor say to me, yeah, boy, you guys really were pioneers. You really did some work getting that passed. And I said, honey. So at the same time, it was the early 70s. There were rumblings that a provincial synod would soon decide to ordain women, and I yearned to be able to respond to that call that I had felt so many years earlier. I knew that now that calling to be an invitation was from God to serve in the Moravian Church. If you see it, you can be it. The call was powerful, but for women, it's never without consequences or challenges. Any call for women. And the reason is because before we get to talking about unleashing, we've got to be talking about being leashed. In the 1970s, the most important things in my life were the things that I was already leashed to. My husband, 2 wiggly little girls, and a baby boy. These are 4 people that I had willingly and joyfully made a commitment to love. Marriage and motherhood hit me hard. I knew, standing at that communion table in Lakeview Moravian Church in 1963, that this was the man I was going to spend my life with, God willing. And I knew that when a kind social worker handed me Jennifer Ward at 3.5 months, that my life would never be the same. I knew that there would be things asked of me to protect and love those people that I had no way of knowing or anticipating. What would I have to do to protect this child? What would I have to do to keep them safe and to keep them loved and to keep them fed? What would I have to do? I knew that I could never stop loving those children, that husband, and even death has not stopped me from being the mother of our son, Ben. Those leashes of love became strands of silver and gold that connected us. And of course, the leashing gets bigger and the circles get bigger with more and more people to love, and women are good at that. We don't have to have children. We don't have to have husbands or wives as women to know that loving another person makes us vulnerable. Because love is unpredictable. Love is extravagant. There are no limits. It often compels us to do wild and dangerous things. Wild things like the wild geese. Mary Oliver's Wild Geese. You do not have to be good. You do not have to walk on your knees for 100 miles through the desert repenting. You only have to let the soft animal of your body love what it loves. Tell me about your despair, yours, and I will tell you mine. Meanwhile, the world goes on. Meanwhile, the sun and the clear pebbles of the rain are moving across the landscapes, over the prairies and the deep trees and the mountains and the rivers. Meanwhile, the wild geese high in the clean blue air are heading home again. Whoever you are, no matter how lonely, the world offers itself to your imagination, calls to you like the wild geese, harsh and exciting, over and over announcing your place in the family of things. You do not have to be good. You do not have to walk on your knees for 100 miles through the desert repenting. You only have to let the soft animal of your body love what it loves. Perhaps those who cannot love another may never have known themselves to be loved, to be lovable. And here's the deal, ladies. We didn't invent love. We learned it from God. It was the first verse of Scripture we ever learned. God is love. It's about what we need to know. There's a sign on a little church in our town, in Watertown, Wisconsin, and it just says, "Just love everybody. God will sort it out later." I was at the airport, and I was watching a mother who was holding a little child kind of up on her. She was maybe 7 or 8 months, and she had those 2 white teeth that stick out when you first get those teeth. And everybody was like not making eye contact with everybody. We're all just sort of, like reading our books, looking really busy. But this little child was having none of it. And she would pick somebody, and she would just look at them and smile until they smiled back. And then she would pick somebody else. And pretty soon she had this whole circle of people smiling with her love. And it seems to me that is the perfect example of how God must look at us every moment. Smiling and saying, "Look at that. Look at her. Look at that woman." We are always held as God's beloveds. We are leashed to God in that love. In confirmation, in baptism, in membership, in participation, in commitment, in all our wholehearted way of living. Whatever we say to God, yes, as Lord did said in her poem, we need not worry that we aren't always faithful in that leashing ourselves, because God is always faithful to us. We are leashed, we are tethered, we are held. We are promised that in benediction, God's face shines upon us, God's countenance is lifted upon us. There are times that we wonder whether we are worthy of that love. And on those times, we read these familiar words from Romans, and it gives us hope. What then are we to say about these things? And I always love a scripture texture that sets out with something, these things. What were they talking about? They were talking about troubles right here in River City, troubles. What then are we to say about these things? We all know what they are. If God is for us, Who is against us? He who did not withhold his own Son, but gave him up for all of us, will he not with him also give us everything else? Who will bring my charge against God's elect? It is God who justifies, who sorts it out at the end. Who is to condemn? It is Christ Jesus, who died, yes, who was raised, who is at the right hand, who indeed intercedes for us. Who will separate us from the love of Christ? Will hardship or distress or persecution or famine or nakedness or peril or sword? No. In all these things we are more than conquerors through him who loved us. For I am convinced that neither death nor life, nor things present, nor things to come, nor powers, nor height, nor depth, nor anything else in all creation will be able to separate us from the love of God in Christ Jesus. We are leashed, we are tethered, we are loved.
So there are good leashes, which she has acknowledged, but this conference is called Unleash Your Power. Not necessarily unleash from that which is good in our lives, but what does it mean to unleash from things that hold us? If you look up the word unleash, it means to set loose, to pursue. Isn't that a cool image? Or to run at will, to abandon control of, or to remove restriction. The most difficult part in my life of unleashing over the years has been naming that which restricts me. If you don't name it, you can't see it. So sometimes, though, naming our restrictions means calling something or someone very familiar to us a perpetrator, and that is the most difficult thing we can do. Naming our leashes can be one of the most fear-instilling challenges of our lifetime, but it is so necessary. And it's how we claim our power. We say, I will no longer keep this leash on this body, this spirit. It is not mine. I'm taking it off. It should be easy, but it's not. But we do it all the time. And now I would like to share my favorite Mary Oliver poem. We didn't mean to do that either.
Both read Mary
Right.
Oliver.
This one's called The Journey, and I don't have it on the fridge, but I keep it in my phone and read it weekly. One day you finally knew what you had to do and began. Though the voices around you kept shouting their bad advice, though the whole house began to tremble and you felt the old tug at your ankles, "Mend my life," each voice cried. But you didn't stop. You knew what you had to do, though the wind pried with its stiff fingers at the very foundations, though their melancholy was terrible. It was already late enough and a wild night, and the road was full of fallen branches and stones. But little by little, as you left their voices behind, the stars began to burn through the sheets of clouds, and there was a new voice, which you slowly recognized as your own, that kept you company as you strode deeper and deeper into the world, determined to do the only thing you could do, determined to save the only life you could save. Bam. That is like one of the most powerful images I've had in my life, and I've had to do some unleashing of a restrictive theology that was shoved into this little heart and little mind as a child. I'm still getting some of that out. So not all leashes are bad. We talked about marriage, when we covenant with our partner in our community to grow in love through all joys, calms, frictions, and offenses as part of our liturgy. The leashes that are unhealthy, though, are the ones that are unwholesome and restrictive, that they're put upon us, that hold us down and try to define us, as if anyone could define all of who we are. It can feel risky and riddled with power, and maybe that's why we're afraid, to allow ourselves to be free, to be on the loose, to pursue our unfulfilled dreams, to run at will toward that which brings us pleasure. What? We deserve to run towards that which gives us pleasure, to abandon control of our emotions and inhibitions, to remove restrictions that keep us from thriving and have kept us from thriving for way too long. There's a lot of power in making those kinds of choices, real power in unleashing ourselves, to let go of the things that don't seek our good and never sought our good, to say, I'm done with you. And there's another verse from our quirky spiritual director. She reminded me in 2 Timothy 1:7, God did not give us a spirit of cowardice, but rather a spirit of power and of love and self-discipline. So why do we accept and cradle and nurture a spirit of cowardice when the gift from our Creator is, always has been, and always will be a spirit of power? Maybe it's a toxic memory, something that we've shoved deep down inside that just keeps bubbling up. Maybe we have a sour attitude. Maybe it's been there for a long time. Maybe an unpleasant event keeps telling us that we're powerless, and we begin to feel insecure, and we feel self-conscious and anxious up here, and fearful, right? I'm not the only one that feels these things. Yes? Okay. So we have failed ideas. That's a human thing. We feel abandoned by people we thought loved us. We are abused by people we trusted. We have chronic illness sometimes, unrelenting depression. All of that is familiar to all of us. And all of it threatens to delete and deplete our power. But power is depleted only when we allow it to be depleted. So I'm looking smartphones. Most of us have some kind of cell phone. Does it just run all the time without you doing anything? No. You plug it into the power source. Every day, probably. I have 96 houseplants at home. 96 indoor houseplants. And do they just live all on their own all the time? No, I spend 25 minutes once a week watering them all. And then I put them in the direct sunshine. That's their power source, right? So we get it. The only way to keep ourselves powered up is to stay connected to our power source and the giver of the spirit of power, our Creator. That's where we get it. And you, no matter what your age, no matter what you've been through, no matter your comfort level with tattoos, no matter your current reality, you can be free. Maybe that means going and getting a tattoo. Maybe not, that's okay. You can run at will to places where you feel most alive. You can do that. Or walk, or, use your walker, whatever. You can go to places where you feel most alive. And you can be loosed to pursue your passions. You can abandon control of your emotions. You can do that. It's okay. You might do it and find that you have the most hearty, obnoxious laugh that comes out. You might do that deep, dirty crying where you just can't stop. Both will be cathartic. You can do that from time to time. We have the power to remove restrictions that keep us from thriving. That's the gift from God. God wants each of us to thrive, not just live all right, to thrive. And the good news is it's never too late to claim our power and to thrive in our powerfulness. Amen? Amen.
Amen. We'd like to invite us to a brief time of liturgy. There's going to be some motions because I always feel it's better, for me at least, to pray with our hands and our bodies. So Christie and I will read a little text and a petition to God, and we'll end with Lord set us free, and I ask that you would respond with Lord set us free. And this is where we are sometimes, holding on, and as we say, Lord set us free, let's let our hands be free, and then maybe the next one we'll get another idea. I think we'll do better if we stand.
If you're able.
Or want to.
Yeah. We have no power over you.
We have no rules. So,
cried with a loud voice, "Lazarus, come out!" The dead man came out, his hands and feet bound with strips of cloth and his face wrapped in a cloth. And Jesus said to them, "Unbind him and let him go." Lord, when we lose the energy and spark of life and become dead to ourselves and to others, Lord, set us free. Lord, set us free.
Just then there appeared a woman with a spirit that had crippled her for 18 years. She was bent over and was quite unable to stand up straight. When Jesus saw her, he called her over and said, "Woman, you are set free from your ailment." Lord, when we are brought low by our past, by abuse, by neglect, and fear the future, Lord, set us free.
Lord, set us free. Now, Simon's mother-in-law was in bed with a fever, and they told Jesus about her at once, and he came and he took her by the hand and he lifted her up. Then the fever left her. Lord, when we are sick and tired and feel hopeless, Lord, set us free. Lord, set us free.
The sick man answered him, "Sir, I have no one to put me into the pool when the water is stirred up. And while I am making my way, someone else steps down ahead of me." Jesus said to him, "Stand up, take your mat and walk." Lord, when we feel cranky and are sure that our family and friends no longer care, set us free.
Lord, set us free. If you continue in my word, you are truly my disciples, and you will know the truth, and the truth will set you free. Lord, when we lose our way and forget that you hold our hands and have the power to free us, Lord, set us free. Lord, set us free.
Jesus said to them, "Very truly, I tell you, I am the gate for the sheep. I am the gate. Whoever enters by me will be saved and will come in me and go out and find pasture. I came that you may have life and have it abundantly." When we just go through the motions of life and find it difficult to live abundantly, Lord, set us free.
Lord, set us free. For God's anger is but for a moment. God's favor is for a lifetime. Weeping may linger for the night, but joy comes with the morning. When we greet each day, fill our hearts with joy. Lord, set us free. Lord, set us free.
Lord is steadfast, O God. I will sing and make melody. Awake, my soul, I will wake with the dawn. I will give thanks to you, Lord, among the peoples. I will sing praises to you and among the nations. Wake us up with a song in our hearts, a melody, a joyful noise. Lord, set us free.
Lord, set us free. You have turned my mourning into dancing. You have taken off my sackcloth and clothed me with joy, so that my soul may praise you and not be silent. Lord my God, I will give thanks to you forever. Set our feet a-dancing, or at least let us tap our feet with gusto. Lord, set us free.
Lord, set us free. Amen.
Amen.
There is a hymn, it's a bigger sheet, it's called "Come You Sinners." You're powerful sinners, so we like the theology, and we will sing this together, and then there will be a video, hopefully, that will play on the screen while some gifts are distributed to all of you, handmade.
I'll see you.
Yeah.
After the, when the video starts, that will be your exit signal. There are 10 women, 8 women, plus Christie and I, with boxes around the side of this building, all the way around. Pick a woman, go to that box, and receive your gift. Sweet. We should go down. Let's go down some.